Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Fortified Life podcast, where we are passionate about developing a dependency on Jesus in the marketplace. I'm your host, Jason Davis, aka Mr. Fortify. Every week, we have the opportunity to bring on authors, speakers, coaches, CEOs, and leaders and nonprofits who are also passionate about putting God back in business. And it's no different this week, folks. I'm really excited for our guest today. Let me tell you a little bit more about him. Our guest today on the Fortified Life is Dale Cardwell. He's a consumer investigator, six-time Emmy Award winner, founder and CEO of TrustDALE. He's an author, and he's a leading consumer advocate helping Americans find companies they can trust. Dale, welcome to the Fortified Life.
Jason, it's a pleasure to be with you.
Absolutely. Dale, when someone looks at a resume like yours, we know that in 2026, you just didn't wake up and all of a sudden have all those experiences. So, kind of, we know the bio, Dale, but kind of take us on the journey. I mean, having worked in the media for so many years, how did that kind of lead up to entering? You know what? Let me kind of pen some of this stuff down and actually put it into books. So, take us on that professional journey.
So, Jason, I was an investigative journalist in five cities around the country: Nashville, Raleigh, Durham, Birmingham, Atlanta, of course. And I would stand there every night at 6 and 11, and I would tell people how rotten the world was. I'd say Mary was taken for $10,000. They believe this guy is the culprit. The police are trying to find him. It's unlikely they will. Don't let this happen to you. And I did that thousands of times. And I stopped myself one night and I said, wait a second. People are making the same seven mistakes over and over and over. They're hiring someone that's telling a story that's too good to be true. They're not checking references. They don't know the difference between a real review and a fake review. They're hiring
Mm,
someone that has no findable office or means to be discovered. They're hiring someone without liability or workers' comp insurance. They're hiring someone that does not tell the truth. And
mm,
finally, they don't read their guarantee until it's too late and they realize that there's an exception to what they thought they were covered for. And I realized, wait, I can reverse engineer this. I can create a 7 point standard and vet companies ahead of consumers hiring those companies. But here's the secret sauce, Jason. I sat down and I do sit down with every owner that I work with and I say, I believe that you meet a standard and that you're exceptional in your field, but here's the way I want you to prove it. I want you to sign an agreement with me that says I'm in charge if the consumer believes that you've failed or faltered.
mm.
And if I decide that you did not meet the obligations of the written agreement, then you're going to have to fix it up to $10,000. And a couple of things happen, Jason. Humility plays a huge role in my company and in the companies that I work with. Some of the owners would look at me and they'd say, okay, well, I see how that could work, but wait a second. My daddy started this company. I'm not going to put anybody in charge of my customer service. And I realize that those are the people that allow pride to get in the way of solving a problem. I didn't realize
Mm.
it at the time, but the other group of owners would look at me and say, okay, that's a no-brainer because you're not going to get any complaints because we fix things. And those people over there that are advertising way more than we are don't fix things. And so
Mm.
that was the secret sauce, Jason, is that I pair myself with companies that are humble and believe in win-win relationships with consumers.
Mm. Dale, you speak with such conviction. As you were doing all your investigation over the years, what helped develop that, Dale? Because it's one thing to treat the customer with the highest degree of integrity and excellence, but how did you develop conviction that you have for the customer?
You know, when you tell consumer stories, Jason, I call it getting your arms around a story
Mm,
enough to be able to relate it to somebody else. You know, if you're a doctor, if you're a lawyer, if you're a professional, you're really good at what you do. But there are a lot of angles to consumerism that you don't cross paths with, and you don't feel confident that you know how to. So I fill that gap for consumers. I have studied enough difficult issues, especially consumer issues, over my 40-year career that I have confidence that I know how to get my arms around it well enough to make a recommendation to some people. And I realized that people were in pain and they were being harmed unnecessarily. And I realized that I could stand in the gap and help them.
Mm. I love that why, Dale. Now, and also, Dale, as I'm thinking about that, and wrapping your arms around people, what role does, as a man of faith, what role does faith play in the work that you do day to day?
Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your strength, with all your mind, with all your soul, and love your neighbor as you love yourself. I mean, no greater words have ever been spoken. And if you can love other people and put their needs before yours, then it makes the rest of my job a lot easier.
Well stated there, Dale. I think that scripture basically captures the the mission for all of us. And Dale, the way that you serve people, this is where we're going to get into the book. And I love, first, I love the title because it just, in this post-pandemic world, Dale. So, folks, we're talking about Dale's book, Don't Get Scammed, Get Smart. 7 Steps to Outsmart Today's Most Dangerous Post-COVID Scams. And Dale, we are, basically kind of four-ish years removed from the pandemic, but there's a lot of kind of market fallout that we're facing. So what was the reason for this book today? What made you go, you know what? I've looked at the landscape. We're coming out of which was a tough environment, really, for everybody around the
Yes.
globe. What made you say, you know what? This is needed right now?
So I wrote my first book in 2019, and
Hmm.
it was Don't Get Scammed, Get Smart, 7 Simple Steps to Become a More Savvy Consumer. Thought I was finished. Read the book, get my 7 point acronym to protect yourself, and let's all be safe. Then COVID hit, and so many scams morphed their way onto the internet. And what I
Mm.
realized, a lot of consumer experts want to teach you the elements of a scam to recognize it when it's happening. But because scams morph and they change, I want to create I want to teach you the emotional triggers that you're going to feel when someone is taking advantage of you economically. And that was the reason for the new book. Um, Government and grant stimulus scams exploded because of COVID. And so many people were
Mm.
getting conned into paying money to people, hoping that they would get some kind of a grant or government fund. And, I needed to warn people about that. Cryptocurrency scams are rife today and they exploded with the internet. Church smishing scams, those are con artists that get a hold of church directories, whether they're on paper or online, and they will start texting the members of a congregation and say, Paula has cancer, and we're raising a love fund for Paula's health care. And would you please send us $500? Go buy a gift card, scratch off the back, and give us the codes.
Mm.
Romance scams, people that are on an oil dike in off the coast of Cyprus and they're lonely and they strike up a conversation with a lonely widow or widower in the States. And before you know it, they've created a relationship, an emotional relationship, and you're sending that person money. I needed to warn people about that. There's online shopping scams. There are entities that will duplicate a legitimate website, bring it over, create a new website, and start conducting business as though they're that company, and unsuspecting people send money to that company simply because they've stolen the image of a website. Fake check scams. Most people
Mm.
don't realize that if somebody sends you a check and you go cash it, you can cash it. But what you're going to learn 3 days later is that there were insufficient funds in that account. Guess who's on the hook for that $3,000? The consumer,
Wow.
right?
Yeah.
And so the other thing I wanted to warn people about was what impact COVID had on our legal system. It has set our legal system, both civil and criminal, back years. And so what I teach in the book is avoid having to deal with the legal system. That's the best way to succeed in our current legal system.
Mm. Dale, there's so much to unpack there. One of the most powerful things I like in the book, Dale. I think it's chapter 1. You talk about elements of a scam. Some people don't even know where a scam begins and ends. So talk to us about that. Just what are even the pieces of a scam?
Well, I said I have a seven letter acronym to protect people, and it's
Hmm.
called FFFDEAL. FFF is when you're on defense, when you're not expecting to be solicited and someone comes and offers you a deal. The first thing you need to look for is, do they want your money immediately or fast? If they want your money without your ability to talk to your spouse, run it by an expert in the space, sleep on it, that's a red flag that someone's setting you up. Funds, they're going to give you an unbelievable opportunity. Either
Mm,
the down payment for what you're promised is incredibly low, or the payoff is incredibly high, but you haven't gotten it yet. Funds. And then finally, found. Con artists who are really good at what they do have gone to great lengths to never be found once they have your money. They've given you a fake name, a false address, and a fictitious opportunity.
mm,
Fast funds found. Now, when it's time to hire a plumber, when it's time to re-roof your house, or pretty much anything that takes trust in the relationship, it's time for you to go on offense. And I characterize this like a sporting event. So fast funds found is defense, and DEAL is offense. I want you to define the elements of a good deal. You do that
mm,
by comparing product, offer, and price. You figure out what the product is, and then you borrow it from a neighbor, or you go look at it and you do research. You figure out what that product needs to do for you, not what it promises to do for the entire world, because you may only need a Toyota to get across town. You might not need a Lamborghini,
mhm.
right? So when you become familiar with what you need that product to do, now it's time to entertain offers. And you're not going to get a shortage of people wanting to sell you that product. But a magic thing happens in our economy when those people know they're competing for your business, Jason. The price falls to an equilibrium point. And that's how
Mm,
you know that you're getting a fair price, right? So that's the magic of defining your deal. I want you to ensure the elements of your deal by having an ethical negotiation, an effective guarantee. And so, an ethical negotiation is when there are no surprises
mhm.
and someone is offering you an opportunity. And if they suddenly say, "Oh, wait a second, I forgot to tell you there's a $1,500 documentation fee," that's your sign that they have the script and you don't, and that they're setting you up. And then an effective guarantee. I get calls every week and emails, Jason, from people that say, "I've been taken. My guarantee is worthless." And I always say,
Mm,
"When did you find out?" And they said, "When I read it after the product failed." So I
mm,
want you to read your guarantee, see what's in it before you sign on the dotted line to commit yourself to that purchase. I want you to authenticate your purchase, right? By reviewing government watchdog reports, looking at real reviews. And the way you do that is there are thousands and thousands of reviews for all these companies. I don't want you to focus on the 5 stars. I want you to go to the 1 stars. I want you to take a look at why this company is accused of failing to perform. And I want you to look for patterns. Does the complainer say that, well, they took my money and didn't show up? Does the complainer say they broke this and didn't repair it? I want you to look for patterns where people say this company is performing in this manner and they're doing it consistently and it's wrong. That's how you know not to hire a company, right? The other thing is that when people have been burned, the one thing they almost always do is that they will complain to the governor's office of consumer affairs, or they will leave a bad review with the Better Business Bureau. If the company has a rating lower than a B with the Better Business Bureau, it's for 2 reasons: they deserve it, or they ignore the Better Business Bureau, thinking if they're not a member, why would I participate? Well, it's a mistake not to participate in answering complaints to the Better Business Bureau. And finally, I want you to legitimize the elements of your deal. You do that by making certain that the company has a business license. Now, people say, "Dale, business license costs $150 a year. What's the value of that?" Well, it's the company telling the government, "Here's who I am, here's where I can be found, and here's what I do." Because
mm,
in the event you do have to take someone to court, you need those elements to present a case, right? I want you to make sure that they carry liability and workers' comp insurance. So many companies that are offering you 50% less are companies that are cutting corners in areas that you can't see. If a vendor is harmed while they're at your house doing work and they don't have liability insurance, as incredible as it sounds, Jason, you and I would be responsible for their injuries if that happened on our property, right?
Mm.
And then finally, something that is so securing, but no one does it, is a lawsuit search.
Mm.
Virtually every county in America now has an online portal where you can go to the magistrate court, which also is called the small claims court, put in the name of the company on the search window, hit return, and see if they have been sued consistently and successfully. Now, if they've been sued but they haven't lost, then don't hold that against them. But if you see that they've lost 2 or 3 suits in the last 5 years, that's your sign not to do business with that company. Fast Funds Found, DEAL. If people will remember that acronym, it will remove 99% of the things that can go wrong in a vendor consumer relationship.
My goodness, Dale, that was gold that you just gave. And folks, I'm telling you, you need to go out and get your copy of this book today. Dale, as you were breaking down the seven steps, it made me think about because you wrote your other book in 2019, and you mentioned the court system, us being kind of set back years. How do the scams today differ pre-COVID? What have you seen?
Okay, so the one element that's consistent is a story that's too good to be true.
Okay.
Uh, but what has happened is that so many of these scams are taking place without having to be in person with the person. The internet is creating an opportunity for the con artist to be in another country and pretend that they're next door. And so
Hmm.
that's the reason that justice is so denied and delayed. Another thing that I love about the book are the 10 people who stepped forward and allowed me to share their real story of how they were harmed by these post COVID scams. And some of them, Jason, are pretty embarrassing, right? I'll tell you,
Mm.
my own dad is in the book. He called me a couple of years ago and said, Dale, I do not know what I've gotten myself into, but I was on Facebook and I clicked on a picture that said, hey, she was a real looker when she was in the movies back in the 50s. And he says, the next thing I know, my computer is blaring at me and it says, you have entered a site. And if you do not click on this link and buy our product, that we're going to make it public that you're on this site. And I said, Dad, here's what you got to do. I want you to reboot your computer. And he sat there and he stuck his finger on the power button and he rebooted it. And that threat was gone.
Mm.
90% of those kinds of online threats that say that you've entered an area that is not allowed or pornographic or whatever, most of them can be ended by rebooting your computer. Some are more sophisticated when they can find a path into your software, then they can enter your banking accounts, things like that. But the number
Mm.
one piece of advice I have is do not panic. Do not panic
Mm.
and do not let anyone threaten you with exposure to get you to take an action because that's the two paths that are going to end in disaster for you. If you make a rush decision or you're worried that someone's going to expose you.
Dale, I'm so glad you brought that up, and thank you for the stories. As you know, stories are able to paint such a vivid picture for us. Emotional triggers um, are something that you've mentioned. You gave an example with your dad. How would you coach someone today? The speed of the person trying to get you to buy is one thing to create that angst, but how would you coach people, whether in the book or even with the people that you serve, what is some additional words of wisdom around handling our emotional triggers associated with the scam?
Three emotions you're almost always going to feel when you're being set up: greed, fear, and shame.
Mm.
One of the telltale signs of being set up is when you start to feel sorry for the person who's making the offer because you think you're taking advantage of them. And when you have that feeling in your conscious that, wow, I'm kind of getting away with something, well, they want you to feel that way. And that's
Hmm.
another great way to know that you're being taken advantage of and you're being set up when you think you're taking advantage of someone else.
Mm, that's good right there, Dale. And I appreciate you giving language to some of the feelings. And we're not even always honest about them, Dale. Greed and then shame, especially. My goodness. Dale, I always like to ask this question to different authors. What was the, what was maybe the toughest chapter or part of the book to write, and what was the easiest part of the book to write?
I think the toughest part was just getting started.
Okay.
And when you authors reach a point where they have to decide, do I have a story to tell that helps other people? Do I have a story to tell that's compelling and what people would find interesting? You know, when you feel as though you have a message and that you need to share it, you need to just go ahead and share it. Trial and errors. Start that story. Generally, start with the best story you have. You're telling your best friend a story. You're like, hey, you're not going to believe what happened to me yesterday. So that's the
Mm.
mindset that I entered into when I sat down and wrote the book. Then the second challenge you have is, when is enough enough? When do I say the end? Right? Um, my book's about 200 pages. You can read it in an afternoon. I think you should give it as a gift to your family, to your college age kids, because sadly, our schools are not preparing our young people for the economy they're about to enter.
Mm.
And what I found is that most people are not going to take the security steps that I recommend until they've been burned,
Wow.
until they've lost $500. When they've finally been tricked, that's when you wake up and say, I need to do more research if I'm going to risk my money. And so my book does that. It says, here are the steps you need to take that will take you mere minutes, but it's going to save you. When I make a speech, I talk about, who here wants to save $10,000 in the next 10 minutes. And of course, everyone's hand goes up. And I say, can help. I can tell you that I can save you $10,000 in the next 10 minutes if you listen to what I say and apply the lessons that I'm going to share. And then I say, who here wants to save $100,000 in the next 10 minutes? And of course, everybody's hand goes up. And I said, there is someone in this room. If there's 30 people in the room, there's someone that is very likely going to save themselves a huge amount of money simply because, don't get scammed, get smart, run those elements by your deal, and make certain that you're protecting yourself.
Mm. Well, folks, what you're hearing from Dale is got to be intentional. Got to take action. And so, Dale, that action would be for people to go out and get a copy of this book. So, Dale, where can people purchase the book and keep up with all the wonderful work that you're doing?
Sure. Well, Amazon.com is probably the easiest place to go. Uh, Thankfully, we debuted in the number one spot for consumer guides, and we're selling strong today because it is such an easy way to protect yourself and your loved ones. You can also go to TrustDALE.com. There, you're going to find the ability to purchase the book and also find hundreds of companies that have met my 7 point investigative standard and signed a deal with me to offer you a free $10,000 Make It Right guarantee in the event you need it. The good news is I've been doing this almost 16 years. I've had to enforce the $10,000 Make It Right guarantee 8 times. Now,
Wow.
I've sent out a lot of $50 gift certificates for people who said the plumber didn't show up on time. Um, but what I do is create a bridge between the consumer and the company, and I preserve communication. And when you can do that, things go much better.
Mm. So good, Dale. Dale, you strike me as someone that's always got something in the hopper. Like what's next with the way that you serve businesses. So, Dale, we're in the springtime. Is there anything exciting coming up, late spring, early summer, or even later in 2026 that I don't want to get you in trouble especially if it's, something secretive, but what's on the horizon for you in the back end of 2026?
Okay, goodness. And so lots of things. I spent a lot of time as an investigative reporter. One of the stories that I was heavily involved in was sadly, the exposure of the murder of DeKalb County Sheriff Derwin Brown at the hands of Sidney Dorsey. Sidney Dorsey recently passed away at the age of 86 in the state prison system. But there is a story coming out on NBC this spring, I think it's in June, that's going to retell that story with new information that people have never encountered. And so that's something to look forward to. And also, we've launched our own podcast. It's called Trust Issues with Dale Cardwell. And the reason we call it Trust Issues is because think about it, Jason, almost every difficult decision that you have to make involves some level of trust. And
Very true.
as AI becomes more and more pronounced, and when you have a problem with a company and you're on the phone and then you realize, wait a second, this isn't even a human being. What these companies have done is that they've created a path for you to get lost in the circular file without ever getting to someone who can resolve your problem. The reason that TrustDALE is such an effective tool is because I call it leverage. I have leverage with the companies because they want people to find them on my website. So the companies do the right thing. It's as simple as that. So please, you can find my podcast, Trust Issues, on pretty much every podcast platform. All you have to do is search Dale Cardwell or the word Trust Issues. And of course, Jason, I'm going to continue to be making speeches throughout the spring and the summer. And folks can come to my website to book me for their group if they'd like to do that.
I love it, Dale. I'm already excited, and I don't even know the full calendar. Folks, you've heard it from Dale himself, a lot more to come in 2026. Well, Dale, as we close out, I just wanted to say thank you. You have given us wisdom, you've given us action and encouragement, and hopefully we can all save some money and avoid the heartache of scams going forward. So thanks for hanging out with us today here on the Fortified Life, Dale.
It was my pleasure. Thank you so much, Jason.
Yes. Well, folks, you know how we end things. Don't compartmentalize your faith in the marketplace. And from the boardroom to the bathroom, God is with you. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe to the Fortified Life podcast at The Fortified Life on YouTube and search The Fortified Life on any podcast platform of choice, Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio. You put us in there, you can find us. Everything that Dale talked about, his website, the book, will be in the show notes. So you will be able to avoid scams and have the tools that you need. We'll see you next time on the Fortified Life podcast.